for CAMPO tonight. Can I have roll call, please, Kathy? Oh, you're not Kathy. I just saw you 2 seconds ago.
Yeah, I
I'm
look
sorry.
different today. Chairperson Kimbrough.
Here.
Vice Chair Stedfield.
Here.
Member Bagwell. Here. Member Bunkowski.
Here.
Member Erb. Member Keller. Member McQuarrie.
Here.
Member Rosenberg. Here. A quorum's present.
Great, thank you. Any changes to the agenda? The chair's making none.
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any disclosures on the board tonight for any items on the agenda? Seeing nobody giving me eyes, we have none. Next on the agenda is public comment. If there's any members of the public wanting to come forward, hopefully not on the agenda items, but you may for tonight on any items for the CAMPO board. Seeing none, bring it back for approval or changes to the minutes from the June 12th meeting.
I move to approve the minutes of the. My mic died. I move to approve the minutes of the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization for June 12th, 2019 as presented.
Second.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Now we go to the public meeting items. Item 6A. For information only, presentation and discussion on task 3.2, transit planning of CAMPO's 2019-2020 Unified Planning Work Program. Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll tee this one up for us. In a moment, you'll hear a presentation on the second technical memo for the Transit Development and Coordinated Plan from Gordon Shaw from LSC Consultants. As you know, the Transit Development and Coordinated Plan combines a short-range transit planning element, which is a 1 to 5 year plan, a long-range element, which is up to 20 years, and then a coordinated human services plan. Last month, you heard a presentation on technical memo number 1, which, as you recall, was background data and all the information needed to support a transit plan. This month, you'll hear a presentation on technical memo number 2, which then takes that data and starts looking at reasonable and feasible alternatives that we might consider for both route and service changes in the future. You can think of the information in this tech memo number 2 and this presentation that you'll hear tonight as a broad look at possible alternatives. Nothing in here has been decided on or committed to. Really, the purpose of this tech memo is to say, well, let's look at everything and see what the fiscal implications are, what the benefits and constraints are, and then let's have a discussion about what we might want as a CAMPO region for the short range, the long range, and potentially there's things in here that we don't want at all. And so staff are really looking for feedback, comments, if you have thoughts on any of this, and please feel free to be honest and have a good discussion after the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gordon, and he can correct me and add on to everything I've said. Thanks, Gordon.
Okay, thank you, Lucia. I assume everyone can hear me all right. Gordon Shaw, engineer and planner with LSC Transportation Consultants. Our office is up in Tahoe City, and Justine Rembach is with me, planner with the firm, and assiduously taking notes right now. So as we have a discussion, it'll all get captured. As Lucia mentioned, we are at the interesting part of the study. We had a Tech Memo 1, which is it's all the nuts and bolts and review of it. You hear all the numbers. One thing that we talked about was the peer analysis, which we'll mention as I go through this. But to me, the more fun part is looking at the alternatives and really getting into the pros and cons of the different alternatives. As Lucia mentioned, we are not at the stage right now where that this is and this is absolutely in and this is absolutely out. This really is the consultant putting the information together and hopefully presenting it to you in a comprehensive, understandable way, so that as a whole, you all can be making informed decisions. But like any plan, there's value judgments in here and policy decisions that need to be made. So we kind of have the easy job of kind of focusing on the numbers. You've got the tougher job of thinking about how this fits into your overall community and what you want the system to look like. So we're going to talk a little bit about these possible alternatives. I also would like to talk about, we've got a discussion in here about like a 20-year forecast of where we're going. And we'll get to that point. And then we'll wrap up with talking about some of the social service, transportation integration things, elements of this work scope, and then open it up for discussion. So have kind of hit most of that right now. A little bit about the transit needs before we get into the alternatives. We looked at the needs with regards to the review that you saw in Tech Memo 1 of the demographics and what parts of the system are working well and what need improvement. And then we've also got here some additional background on community input, stakeholder workshops and public workshops. We also did an online community survey. 61 responses here. It would have been nice if there was a bigger number, that it was out there for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and a lot of effort went into it. This is a quick summary, and it's kind of difficult to read from a distance. It's in the handout there too. I just wanted to point out a few things. This is a kind of a standard rank these various elements of the transit program on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being poor or very poor and 5 being excellent. The first line there is how the overall responses lined out. And to look at the glass half full there, that shows us that only 9% thought that the system was poor or very poor. 91% said average to excellent. So I take that, and I've done a lot of these surveys, and those numbers usually end up, rather than being 9 and 91, it can be more like 30 and 70 or 40 and 60. People are happy with the program, the Jack service overall. A couple of things that also kind of come out here. If you look at on the left, the blue and the red, which are the very poor and the poor, the 1s and the 2s, if the thicker part of those, where you see the frequency of bus service, we're not doing so great on the frequency, which is basically once an hour the bus comes by. And then the hours of service, there is quite a few people who think we could be running more hours. On the other hand, if you look at the value for the fare, we didn't even have anybody who said poor or very poor there. The fact that it's $1 fare, people are very happy with that point. And also they like the drivers, and that's kind of a pat on the back for the contractor MV, that we've got a lot of people who think the drivers are doing a good job. In terms of when we ask them what improvements they'd like to see, the big parts of the pie that you can see here, service to new locations, and we'll talk about that in a moment. More shelters, more frequent service, and then also better information on how to use the service. And when we get into the details of a marketing strategy, we'll be talking about that more. So we, as the consultants, took that information, took our evaluation of the existing services, and I just wanted to walk through this kind of summary slide here of what we see to be the strengths and the weaknesses of the existing program. The fares are relatively inexpensive, and if we can afford to continue to provide service at $1 a ride, that helps to expand the elements of the community that the transit program can serve. Jack compares very well against the peer transit systems that we looked at last time. We looked at services in Washington State and Wyoming and South Dakota and so on. It was actually the most cost-efficient of the 5 peers in this service in terms of the cost per hour of service, or the cost per rider. It was the most cost-efficient there. Which says good things about your staff's ability to keep the costs down. One of the weaknesses you see over there on the right side at the bottom is that it was the second to the lowest in terms of how many hours of bus service per person per year. And it wasn't off the charts, but it was low. So that kind of argues to me that, compared to the peers, there may be some room to grow there. Some other of the strengths is that the Jack and Carson City and CAMPO agencies work well together, and there's good local expertise on how to run and manage a transit program and get grants and work with NDOT and so on. Overall, it's a good, consistent schedule, and it seems to be working well. We're serving virtually all the major transit trip generators. It's not like we're missing much at all. There's just a few that we could talk about. And then the free senior bus pass program is a nice addition to the service. The bus route, on the weaknesses side, there are areas where we don't serve, and I'll get to that in a minute. We don't have evening service after 6:30 in the evening on weekdays and after 4:30 on Saturdays. The third one there is really more about the proximity to bus stops and how close the residential areas are, and there's some that we don't have. There is not the funding sources are limited. There's not a ongoing dedicated local funding source like a half-cent sales tax like that RTC up in Washoe has. As we mentioned before, there's probably more we could do in communicating to the public, and then I hit the last one already. So, into the alternatives here, and we started this off with a review of the areas that we're serving now and the areas that we're not serving. And you can see on the left there, what we did is we looked at the area within a 5-minute walk of the buses. And the yellow areas are not within a 5-minute walk of the bus stops, and broke it up into different areas there. So the bottom line here is that Jack service is within a 5-minute walk of 70% of people in Carson City, and there's the other 30% that are too far away for it to be a convenient service for them. We spent time looking at the demographics of those various areas, and then both in terms of the total population and what percent that don't have a vehicle and so on. So what you see over in the right, and I'll have to kind of explain it to you, but that is for those various areas, the potential ridership that we think would be generated by service to those areas. And you can see the top line there is that central area. No, actually the top line is small enough for me that the top line is that central area, and this is it's the area around Northwood Drive that's in the middle of the 2B loop. Yes, thank you, Dirk, right there. It's that whole area. So you're surrounded by the bus route. The 2A and the 2B are going around there. But there's quite a lot of, I think about 5,000 people who live in that area that are not particularly well served. The other line that you see over on the right there is what we call the South Solomon area, which is down South Solomon. So it's too far away from Route 3 to be in transit service, and it's between there and I-580. And that is actually about 25,000 potential riders we think that we could get in that area. And the other ones are much lower. So that starts to tell us something about where we should be looking at and what kind of ridership we would get if we were to add additional routes. The next step then is to look at kind of individual pieces. And this is kind of like building up to a plan. You look at individual elements of work, and then you start to put it together into a plan. And there are a lot of numbers in here, and I don't want to get lost in them. But one of these would be a Southeast Carson City kind of Solomon Road corridor route that would go out Solomon and then back up again. You can see that on this slide here in the light blue is a conceptual plan. You know, it may end up being a little different than that if we choose to go this way, but it gets us in the neighborhood. That would take about 40 minutes to run that route, and then it would come back up to the transit hub. And we've got lots of costs and ridership numbers and so on that one. Another one, a new north route, and this kind of serves this central area, and you can see, maybe if I steal your mouse here, this whole area. So if we put a route up into that Northridge area, kind of the senior center and north of that, That would take about 20 minutes. So you can imagine, since we've got a route, when we start to put things together, if we've got a bus that takes 20 minutes there and then 40 minutes there, we could have a service once an hour with a bus that does one and then the other. We looked at Arrowhead Drive in northeast Carson City, which is the green line way out and around, and it's a long route. It serves a lot of industrial areas and employment. It serves the Health and Human Service office out there. It serves some new residential areas, but not a whole lot of new residential area. We actually looked at two different options there that I'll mention when we kind of summarize here in a minute. One, that was we could run that all day, 12 hours a day, or we could do kind of 2 runs in the morning, get people to work, 2 hours in the afternoon, get them back home. Off to some other, getting into the nuances now of some of the other things that we were asked to look at. There's not a route now that goes up on kind of the north end of North Carson Street between Winnie Lane and Musser and so on in through there. And there's lots of activities along there. So we looked at a couple of different ways to serve that, some of which are good and some of which are not so good. But that's looking at individual, just smaller changes. We also have some routes that are right now going down streets that are probably a little dicey in terms of some of the widths. One is out Lampa Lane and Menlo Drive, which is, for those of you who don't know all your details, just east of 395 off of Williams, off of 50 there, right in there. And there's a section that I think it's 22 feet wide, and we're putting a bus down it. And there's another kind of challenging area down on California Street on the south end of town, kind of south central part of town. And I lost the mouse. There we go. Down in here, which is important to serve because there's lots of apartments down there, but it's tough to get in and out. So we've got some ideas about that. And we also looked when these individual route alternatives about, well, could Route 3 go further south? Lots of comments by the public on this. And right now, basically, we go down to Fuji Park and turn around kind of in the parking lot and then head back north again. And we looked at two options there. One, which would be relatively simple, is to go to Topsy and just basically go south on 395 at that point, turn right on Topsy, there's an existing bus stop there already for the DART system, or the TTD Bluego system, and then kind of come back around. That doesn't require more buses. I think there's running time to be able to do that. It does go a bit into Douglas County, but it's really serving people from Carson City who want to go there. So the cost of that is really pretty minor. The other one that you can see there that goes all the way down to Michael Lane, that requires an additional bus. So that starts to get really expensive. It also starts to pick up a lot more need for dial-a-ride service for a Jack Assist program. So to leap to a bit of a conclusion, we didn't get much ridership out of that. We got a lot of cost. So I know I'm not supposed to have an opinion at this point, but in my opinion on that one is, no, that one's probably not something that we want to pursue too much further. So we have kind of the nuts and bolts together. We know what the costs are, the marginal cost of providing these services based on our existing costs and what kind of ridership we think would be generated. We were also asked as our scope to look at kind of the big picture. Well, what could we do that really kind of shakes things up? How would we do this if we were to kind of start over again, blank piece of paper? So what you see on the left there is one scenario, and that basically, that's closer to what we do now with 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then it adds in the southeast route and that kind of north central route on top of that. Just to dig into the weeds here for a second. Right now, this routes 1 and 2 go to the senior center. If we do this other route here, that light blue route, now we don't have to. Now we've got 2 routes that are going to the senior center. Our routes 2A and 2B can zip east on Williams and 50, and now they can go further. Right now we kind of go about this far, and now we can go and serve another neighborhood. So we pick up some ridership by going further out in this area, and there's some ridership out there. So that we've got kind of the overall impact of that. So just to get into a little bit of nuance here, we call it the 6-route plan, but it takes 5 buses to run the 6-route plan because we're doing 2 routes with 1 bus. We did another one that is on the right there, which we call the full pulse plan. And this is, again, kind of starting from a blank sheet of paper. The system that Jack does now is called a pulse, mostly a pulse system. So all the buses are together at the top of the hour, the federal building there. They all go out, they all pulse back in, kind of like a beating heart. And that is an appropriate form of transit for a community of this size and without any real strong like corridors like a South Virginia street in Reno or something. There's lots of other different ways where you kind of make it more like a grid, but then you end up kind of overlapping routes out in the middle of nowhere. So the idea of a pulse system makes sense. One of the comments that we got from a few riders and a few drivers actually is you can see where Route 2A and 2B go across the north end on College Parkway. Well, why do we do it that way? Why don't we just have all the buses come in and out rather than they do a big hour-long loop like that? So we investigated that on the right and laid out some different options. What we found is that we actually got worse ridership by the one on the right than the one on the left. And what we found is that on 2A and 2B, about 25% of the passengers actually want to go across the north side of Carson City on College Parkway. And this works for them. If you want to go to the community college from the northeast part of town, you don't particularly want to come downtown and then back out again. So once we kind of figured our way through that whole thing, we have gone through the process here of looking at it, but the one on the left is doing a whole lot better than the one on the right. So here is kind of where all these pieces come together, and this is in your packet again. This is looking for every one of these alternatives, and I probably missed a few along the way.
So this is packet page 41.
We've got the ridership, we've got the vehicle hours of service, which is what really drives the cost, is how many hours, because you pay the drivers by the hour, you don't pay them by the mile. So we can calculate the operating cost, and then we can figure out how much fares we're going to get, subtract out the fare revenues to figure out the subsidy. And then the last 2 columns there you see on the right are 2 performance measures. One is the passengers per hour of service. And right now you can see on the top row there that the average for Jack is 13 passengers per hour of service, which is relatively good for a system of this size. And then what's the subsidy? It's the tax dollars for every trip that we carry, which is $4.35. We can go through these alternatives and we can look at those 2 performance measures. Before I get into that, though, I should mention a couple of other alternatives that didn't make it into the previous slides. You see about halfway down there, we look at downtown shuttle and special events shuttles. This is the idea of having an additional vehicle that might look like a trolley, rubber-tired trolley. It might look more like a specialized vehicle, and it might be a little smaller. But what could we do with that? And there's lots of cities that have some kind of a downtown shuttle. The Sierra Spirit service up in Reno that goes up to UNR is one. We looked at year-round service on that. We looked at another one, which is, downtown is relatively active when it's legislative session. So what would that cost, and what kind of ridership we think we'd get out of that, because we wouldn't be running it year-round. And then we also looked at using it as a special event. There's a variety of things that happen around the community that we could be running these shuttles for, particularly if there's a parking shortage. So we've got some dollars in there too. The lower part here, we also looked at a variety of things like, we could do Saturday service or Saturday later service. We could do Sunday service. And we could do, we had lots of comments that, as you saw before, would be great if we had higher frequency. So the last line on there with kind of a sobering cost number is, what if we ran service every half hour rather than every hour, which essentially doubles the service? Well, that cost us over $500,000 to do that, the 577,000 number. So that's all the various options we looked at, 24 of them or something. And then where you can kind of get to a conclusion is look for those green boxes there. And those are indicating the alternatives that that perform better than the system average. So if we're getting more than 13 passengers, new passengers for every new hour of service that we're adding, well, then it turns green. And you can see there that the north route does that north central route, the special event shuttle does that, and then the 6-route system plan that includes the north route does that. Then the final column there on the right is this question of the cost for every new passenger that we're serving. So if we can serve a passenger for less than $4.35, we're bringing down our average from that $4.35 average. And that's those green ones there. That picks up the ones we talked about before. It also picks up the Solomon Road corridor, 413, you can see there. Running that Arrowhead Drive route at the peak times, not all day long, but at least on the peaks. We've got a couple in here that are the real win-wins because like revising Route 2A and 2B, we can actually reduce our subsidy and increase our ridership. So that ends up being a negative number, which kind of counterintuitively is a good thing to have a negative number in that measure. The same thing for going down to Topsy Lane with Route 3. We think we're going to pick up some 2,400 riders, but they're going to pay fares, and it's not really going to cost us much more. So we actually have a negative number there. I talked about the downtown shuttles, and that also makes sense, at least for the legislative session as a starting point. And then this idea, the lower right-hand green one there, is one more run on the Saturday routes. So a 4:30 run. So you can get home a little bit later at 4:28. So this starts to tell us something about kind of the overall pros and cons of these different services. And at least when it comes to the fixed route, that's only a part of the scope of this document here. So let me get on to our overall conclusions here. That north central area and the southeast Carson City routes would be effective. And that could be one more bus to go from 4 to 5. That 6-route scenario is also something that's more effective than that other option that we talked about. Our conclusion is that the numbers say that extending south to Topsy Lane has got good benefits, but extending beyond that, not so much. In fact, it looks really pretty bleak after that, because we have to then add another bus. We looked at service on Sundays. That has got relatively poor performance, as well as evening service to 9 or 10 o'clock and half-hourly service. But the 4:30 run on Saturdays does make some sense. We think that a special event or downtown shuttle has got a high potential to perform well, as long as you're kind of careful about running it when the demand is there. I've just seen too many where it's like, well, let's just run it all day long. And boy, in the off periods, you end up with not too many people on it. I talked about the Saturday service. And one of the things that happens with that 6-route alternative is we can serve North Carson Street, the way the things reconfigure, and then Arrowhead route makes sense, particularly in the peak hours. Off to the Jack Assist program, we are asked to look at the question of, right now we have kind of 2 levels of Jack Assist. The ADA requires the lighter blue there to be served. That's within 3/4 of the mile of the fixed route. Whether you're in the county or not in the county, so you can see some of that goes down into Douglas County. Jack Assist has also, for an extra fare, said we'll go up to a mile, and that's the purple edges around that too. We've had a lot of comments about people saying, well, we'd like to get service out to other areas of the county. What if we were to expand that base area to include all residential areas? Because you can see like southeast of 390, call it 395. 580 there, there's some residential areas that don't get jack assist. That ends up being, we've got some estimates there on ridership, 3,900 riders per year and $63,000 of additional cost. So that's kind of a question. You could think about whether that's something worth doing for people who particularly need that. We also looked at, well, what if we were to expand the extended ADA service? So it's rather than the lower cost service, the higher cost service, that additional part, which generates less ridership, but it still has a pretty substantial increase in cost. We also have some discussion in here about a little bit more of a review on who is eligible for the ADA service, and the fact that if we did that, we could make sure that the people who are using it are the ones who really need it the most, and kind of keep a control on costs. Off to another subject here. This is a CAMPO study. This is not a Carson City study. And so basically the CAMPO service area is what we were asked to look at. And that includes northern Douglas County, which has a transit service that comes up 4 or 5 times a day from the TTE and the senior program. And it also includes Lyon County and the western end of Lyon County and Mound House in Dayton. And that service is really very limited now. It's a 1 day a week that comes in at about 9:30 in the morning and then heads back at about 2:30 in the afternoon. There are about 16,000 people who live in Dayton and Mound House that there's quite a lot of transit need in there. It's surprising how many people live in that portion of the CAMPO service area that are low income and don't have vehicles or don't have vehicles, and seniors and so on. So we looked at 2 options of what we call lifeline service. This is not every day, every hour service, but you can see the numbers down there at the bottom. That would be essentially, as part of the JACK program, a bus leaving first thing in the morning to head out to about the bottom of 6 Mile Canyon Road and 50 and turn around and serve people coming back in, getting in about 9 o'clock in the morning, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. A midday round trip so that you can do a half-day trip. A lot of people who need service like this, being on the bus for 8 hours, by the time you leave at 7 and you get back at 4 or 3, that's tough on them. So this would provide a midday trip and then an afternoon trip to bring people home. And you can see that the costs there are relatively modest. $18,000 or so, and then we think we could get some good fare revenue, about $8,000. So the net subsidy is about $10,000. We also looked at a kind of a different flavor for that. Well, we could get to State Highway 341 and head up the hill and go to Virginia City, and then come back down 6 Mile Canyon and kind of serve that, and serve it in the middle of the day and serve it in the evening. It's actually not that much more expensive to do that, and then we pick up some ridership and maybe some subsidy costs from Story County, and it may make us look a little bit better when it goes to looking for grant funding for this. You notice I'm not talking about who's paying these various pieces of the funding. That would be for further discussion, but this is something that other areas have found to be useful to get at least some level of service for people who are otherwise pretty much stuck if they don't have any other way to get around. I'm getting down near the end here. We do have a discussion in here about capital alternatives. One thing that's kind of a hot issue is the downtown transit center. We don't have in here, the analysis of individual sites. There's a lot of moving parts right now about where those sites might be. We do have in here, though, what the program should be and what we see as the number of buses and what kind of level of amenities and so on that should be provided. Not a Taj Mahal, but a real kind of a good functioning transit center. And then we talk about what kind of criteria that we would look at in terms of where is a good location. And it's just amazing if you move a quarter mile and you take all these buses and all those runs all day long, going that quarter mile out of their way, the costs get high really quickly. We have lots of talk in here about, we did a review of all the stops and where they're located and what shelters and benches and so on. So we have a pretty short list. Actually, you're doing a good job in terms of overall your bus stops. But we have a bit of a list there. Vehicle fleet replacement, that's relatively straightforward, although the costs are high. Over the next 5 years, we've got 7 big buses and, actually the 3 vans and then 4 larger buses, the Eldorado buses. We have a discussion in here about whether we should be migrating to more smaller buses versus the larger 31-passenger buses, and did a lot of analysis on the loads. And it's one of those things where even though a lot of the times there's not too many people on the bus, every once in a while there suddenly is. And you don't want to be putting a second bus out there. Boy, you can just eat, it takes a lot of money to throw that second bus out there. And we don't want to be leaving people behind on the bus stops too. So our kind of bottom line is that we're in the right ballpark with the size of the vehicles now. You're probably aware that there's this thing called battery electric vehicles that they're making a lot of, at least the batteries, just up over the hill. And that is something that's really hitting the bus industry as well as everyone else. The city fare system up in Reno, I think they're up to 7 buses now that are battery electric buses. And the technology is getting better. It's still kind of a daunting cost. They run about $300,000 more per unit. And it's also a daunting cost in terms of the charging facilities that are required for it. There are systems that are not about the same size that they go to their electric provider and they say, well, great and fine, we'll give you the electricity, but by the way, you need to build us a new substation. The entire grid around your facility isn't big enough to charge these buses. My bottom line here, being conservative in this regard, is let other people figure it out, and then if that's a technology that makes sense in maybe 5 years from now, take another look at it. Right now, it would be dollars that are better spent doing some of these other things rather than buying fancy new buses that cost a lot more. We also have some talk in here about fare technologies, and in particular, there's more and more systems where you basically are buying your transit fare on your phone. And yes, people of all economic classes have got a smartphone these days. And then you basically are just showing to the driver, yep, I paid for it, and there's a symbol there, and you're on the bus, and you don't have to do what you have to do now of get to the transit facility or to the senior center and buy a monthly pass. You can just do it all online. So I think I'm running out here. Just a few more slides. There is talk in here about 20 years out and where we be going in 20 years in terms of demographics, the population growth, the change in the population, and the fact that at least particularly over like the next 15 years, we're going to see a big increase in the number of seniors in the community, and that kind of drives the need for service. So the bottom line here is we've got numbers that ridership, even if we didn't do anything, we think the ridership would grow by about 61%. The peak buses would grow from the current 8 to 13, and our operating costs would grow by about 44%. So my bottom line on this is, yes, there's growth. It's not overwhelming growth. We're not looking at tripling the bus system. It's just kind of growing along with the community, and it's something that I think is something we can handle. Finally, we've got discussion in here about some of the social service improvements and ways to improve social service transportation around the area. One of our big conclusions here, though, is you're already doing a lot of this. I go to other communities, and there's the bus system, and there's the senior van system, and there's the sheltered workshop van system, and there's like all this different overlap. That doesn't happen here. There's basically Jack and Jack Assisters is doing all this in terms of services now. That said, we mentioned the Lifeline service out to Lyon County and as a social service mobility improvement. We also have some ideas in here about kind of a semi-formal coordinating coalition that could be kind of a subcategory under CAMPO of getting together every 6 or 4 months and and discussing what the different needs are and how, and if a social agency wants to build a new facility somewhere, how would we serve it, those sort of things. As well as getting more joint planning for grant applications. That always strengthens the grant applications. Other areas have seen success, and the one that I know very well is over in Roseville, of what's called a Transit Ambassador Program, which is a volunteer program. And it's basically getting people over the hurdle of, I don't know how to use a bus system. When I started this business, there was a lot of elderly people that basically particularly, to be honest about it, women who grew up in the Depression who just never got their driver's license. And so they always used a bus system. Now we have a lot of elderly people in particular that they've never used a bus system. So the idea of getting on a transit bus and getting across town, that's something that they need some help. And these volunteer transit ambassador program is something that can go to a senior center and do a bit of training on how to use the system, take them for a ride. And then finally, using your staff to go to work with the staff at the nonprofit agencies to make sure that they know about the transit system. So with that, I am running out of voice here and be happy to discuss all this. Really, we're at the question stage here. What are good ideas? What do you look here that it's like, bad idea, thanks for looking at it, we're done now. We could talk about, too, kind of the timing of these things, if there's things you'd like to see now, if you think we should be kind of building our way to certain things, that's what we're here to talk about. So, thank you. Any final thoughts?
Thanks, Gordon. I will just add that, and I spoke with Vida earlier today out in Lyon County, that some of the decisions in this plan and these long-term planning activities have fiscal implications for the individual jurisdictions, including Douglas, Lyon, and Carson City. So if there was a desire by any of those partner jurisdictions to do this presentation or a similar presentation to those county bodies, Board of Supervisors, that would be something we wanted to offer. So just closing with that as a food for thought.
I have a question for you, Lucia. And this was a great report, a lot of really good data, a lot really good data. But for us up here, the policymakers, I think we have to start with looking at the cost for all these alternatives. So tell us where the money comes from if we want to look at any of these alternatives, because for us, that's what we're going to have to make decisions based on. We can have the best options on the planet in here, and if we have no ability to raise the funds to implement it, then this was a great process, but a waste of time. So tell me, where do we go to get the money, and how is that process going to work so that we have the data to know we can get this much revenue, which allows us to implement these options?
Oh, Brad, you always shoot to the heart of the matter. No, I appreciate the question. And I will say that there's nothing in here that we haven't discussed, brainstormed high-level funding mechanisms for them. So there's nothing in here that I would say there's no way we could fund it. We spoke at length on the staff side with a consultant about, how do we tee this up and how do we present this in a way that we want to make it very clear that there was no expectation that one jurisdiction would pay for all of this. There's been, for the different alternatives, there's different, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, right? So you can't really go out for grant opportunities unless you have a plan that shows that you want it, but we don't want to have a plan that shows we want it if we don't think we could fund it. So for each of these pieces, my answer would be a little bit different. When you talked about something like service out to Dayton, for example, staff have initiated discussions with representatives from Lyon and Story counties about whether there would be a desire to support the local match piece from that side. Staff have met with NDOT staff about availability of potential federal transit funds in the rural areas, so grants that we don't currently have access to at Jack now. But if we did connect out to Dayton, potentially we could apply for those rural area federal transit funds. Something like a downtown circulator, we'd have to look at opportunities for maybe local match from a downtown business association, maybe if they wanted to chip in, or something related to legislature or the lobbyists, or something that would serve that area for local match. So I think there's opportunities there. Of course, getting the federal funds, we would increase our grant ask. So that 5307 or the 5310 formula, federal transit grants, we would have a bigger ask. Whether that's guaranteed, the answer is no. But if it is something that Carson wants or CAMPO wants, having it in the plan would give us the basis to be able to go out and ask for those funds. Does that answer your question, at least in
It
part?
does. Specifically, if we looked at the two alternatives of adding the north route and the south central route, would that be the same process then? It'd be the 5307 funds?
It would be the same process. As you know, we have a bus fleet that, we run very lean. If a bus goes down, generally, that's our only reserve bus. And so we're running our fleet to its max. So when we start talking about expansion, and those numbers are in here, is the purchase of the additional bus. And so, we've done a really good job with our transit asset management plan. We've set up the replacement vehicles. So we'd have to plan for that and rotate those in to get, maybe extend the life of some of our buses that we have now. And in our planned purchases, acquire those vehicles and build that in over the long term. But I think it's something that's doable in talking with NDOT staff of, we can ask for a little bit more FTA funds. And again, it's not guaranteed. But if it's in our plan, it's something that's, I think, reasonable to ask for.
So since those funds are not guaranteed, and we would have to add a bus to add those two routes, you said before it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. So what would we start with? We can't order buses if we don't know we're getting the funds. So we have it in the plan now, assuming that we approve this plan, and we then incorporate it into our TIP. Is that correct?
So at this stage, it's really, after this step tonight, where we get direction on maybe some short-range things, long-range things, then LSC goes back and prepares us a draft plan. So you'll see an actual draft plan in the next month or two. So it may contain all of this. There's some things that may not be in here. Once we get a final plan, in that plan, we can identify things we want to go after aggressively. So those may be things like electronic fare applications or more shelters, or maybe we do prioritize this additional bus and these additional two routes. And then those are the things when staff are looking at grant applications that we're prioritizing and we're going after those. Once we identify funding, or if we are awarded a grant, then it would go into the TIP, and then it would move into that implementation piece.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Lonnie.
So I guess then the issue for us is to potentially go back to the list of recommendations that you had, and we can discuss for each of us where we see priorities or the best potential to say, go after these grants, because I think everything in the actual plan will have things that say, based on available funding or whatever, because I agree with Brad, we can't really just say we want everything. We have to put it in a plan, but then acknowledge that we don't necessarily have the funding for it at this point. So maybe if we look through that, and is one of those on there, the moving of the station where all the buses come together? Is that on there? The transit station itself where it,
Yeah, that's a
Swaps out.
capital alternative, so it doesn't
it's
show
not
up.
on that.
And, because we don't really have a site, we haven't come up with a cost number for that yet.
I recognize that, but I'm just looking from my own perspective that one of the things to me that the success for the long term, so I'm thinking the long term hat of that, is we're gonna have to come up with the restroom location and some things to really continue to keep the Jack system viable in and of itself. So I just want to throw that out as one of our long-term issues. It's great to add routes, it's great to add all of these new services, but if in the end, you can't have any bus drivers and you can't do anything because you don't have an appropriate facility, that we certainly should be looking so that staff does go after sites. That we can direct staff to that energy. So it's just a thought I throw out there that you have to have the actual infrastructure. And then, like you said, getting a bus, just a thought. Get us started.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So looking at the table you have up there, there's a couple of things that seem to be pretty much no-brainers to do, which is revising the routes to serve 2A, 2B to serve North Carson Street, which actually saves us money and increases ridership, likewise going to Topsy. So I think as we start to go through these, the thing I think I'm going to be looking at is a combination of the increase in service, in other words, passenger trips per service hour, the big numbers in the second to right column, and then the marginal subsidy per trip. For the north route, we could get that for half the actual cost of what we're paying now. So I recognize we got to still find a lot of money to come up with that, but it's those routes that seem to give the best increase in ridership for the least overall additional cost that we should be looking at. And I think that the two negative numbers, pretty much a no-brainer to stick at the top of the list here.
Those would be short term.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
And maybe if I just got us in the ballpark, we're spending about $1.8 million a year on the JACK program. Those two that Charles mentioned ends up being about $180,000 of increased cost, but the fare increase, we'll get some fare revenue, so it gets to be about $140,000 of subsidy that would be needed. And, without knowing too much about the status of the federal programs, as of yet, we haven't gotten to that stage, but if it's typically a 50-50 match. So that would be looking at like $70,000 of local taxpayer dollars to add those two routes.
So if I look at the fixed route alternative conclusions, I think the top three, and I'm kind of reiterating what Chaz just said, doing the north and southeast central routes, the six system route, extending Route 3 to Topsy, and then down towards the bottom, the revision of routes 2A, 2B. Those seem to be the highest priorities in my mind on that. And I'm not saying that we can or can't do any of these. I'd say that of that list, those are the highest priorities as I see them. And then on the capital alternatives, the downtown transit center, did you look at whether the existing site could be expanded per your recommendations to put in the additional improvements? Or is that not possible because that's a federal property and we just have the front right away?
We've looked at it in the past. When my predecessor was here, they looked at it pretty extensively. Every time I meet with FHWA staff, every single time they ask us to move the transfer station. There's not a desire on their part to either expand our transfer or to continue to have it operate in that location.
Okay. Our existing bus stop improvements are pretty poor. I think that there's definitely a need to add shelters and benches around town. The vehicle fleet replacement, we're already planning that out. I think we're doing a good job of going out and finding the funds to replace the buses, so I don't know that we need to change anything there unless it ends up that we need to add another bus. I don't think that battery vehicles are on the table for us at this time, but I do think that the onboard or online fare technology is something that we have looked at, and we've come to the conclusion that that would be a good enhancement for us if we can do that. So as far as giving feedback, that would be my personal feedback on these.
Thank you.
I agree with that.
I think I concur. We've looked at this several times in different reports, and those seem to be what bubble to the top as the most effective routes or tools or issues to address if we're trying to put together I'm assuming what do we want to do the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years? I think some of these other things we could amend in later if something that was proposed or a situation changed. But for now, I think this is as aggressive as I'd like to be.
Well,
That's-
I'm not done.
That's great.
I'm going to change the whole thing.
Before we change it, Mr. Chair, I will just say,
mic died.
if there are things in the plan that are even in the long-range section and for some reason grant funding becomes available, there's no reason you can't expedite certain things. So that's always something that can happen.
Actually, I want to, first off, this plan was absolutely essential to know where you're at before you know where you're going. So this plan was perfect. So it was certainly not a waste of time by any means, because everything that's in here needed to be known before you can talk about any improvements or anything about this program. So I thought you put all the elements in there that are needed with a lot of thought and your expertise to make sure what is laid out in front of us makes some sense, because when you throw these numbers out at us, it's going to be a negative number. We have to trust the fact that just because you have 100 years' experience to do this, we can trust those numbers. But what I envision is, I know that it was easy to pick the low-hanging fruit, just pull those off the tree, which you couldn't champion those, but I'm assuming the way it's written, the document's very clear, those are the easiest ones to work with and to make those improvements with minimal cost, if any cost. But to me, I think it's important to have some tiers. The word tier, T-I-E-R, is the fact that, okay, this is what at this lowest level we'd look at, but I'd sure like to see the next level, because if Lucia gets creative or a new funding program or something comes up in the community, or all of a sudden Tesla says they're going to do something, or I know like some guy from Google bought the bus from Douglas County to Gardnerville for a year or something. I mean, there's things that come along. It's nice if you had a second tier of things that make sense, but there's just a little bit of a money, but it serves the public. And I like the way you've rerouted it and been better with the routes. And I like the fact that you talk to the bus drivers, because they probably know more than most about what's going on every day in their buses. So that's the only thing I would ask. I agree with that it's easy to come in and grab the low-hanging fruit and say yes, but I'd still like to see another tier of a priority in your plan somehow that makes sense, that if you had just a few more dollars, you're here, and then breaking it out by capital or the route, so easier for me to understand.
Right.
Bottom line kind of thing at the end, like if you want this, it's this. And so does that make sense? And I'm totally supportive of what, I got two supervisors sitting on either side of me that sign the budget, so I'm certainly supporting them.
What we often do is end up with a constrained plan, financially constrained plan. And when I say that, that might include some additional funding. We can have discussions about whether we have another $100,000 or $200,000 that we could throw into and say, that's a reasonable funding scenario. And then we have the financially unconstrained plan. And those are the things in here. And there are some elements in here like evening service or a bus every half hour that, are more aggressive. But, we can go through that and say, these are the ones that if somebody wants to come in and, you're right, the guy who wanted to fund the bus over Kingsbury Summit just because he felt he had made his money in on the .com scenario, and he suddenly had extra money. So if money fell from trees, what would we do? It'd spend it on. So we can do that on constrained list too.
I don't know about the trees, but some other way than the money coming. I think that's good. I had trouble with this document because I'm not a professional in transportation, so I would, it's overwhelming. It's like a 3-credit class, trying to do it in 4 hours of reading, so. But I thought you did a good job of keeping it at a level that was comprehensible.
Thank you.
Is there any other comments?
One other comment, and this is just nitpicky on my part. If you look at the online survey characteristic summary, you have the poor color and the excellent color are almost identical.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blue.
I would change that.
Yeah. We will fix that. I noticed that on the way down the hill. Can't get there.
So noted and will be in the minutes. Somebody raised their hand, Sandra did.
Yeah, just one comment. We're looking at NDOT in terms of our role in transit for the state. In the past, we've been, for a number of reasons, we manage the rural transit program through the Federal Transit Administration, and it's been really just kind of a grant management. And we want to kind of take another step at, we're the State Department of Transportation, not just Department of Roads, and taking a statewide look at where the needs are. So this is certainly helpful for us looking at that. And then and I'm not sure when we're going to have resources available to do that, even though we stole Graham from you guys, who's fantastic. We're very happy to have him. So I don't have an idea of timing, but I wanted you all to know that's kind of what we're thinking about, is what are the statewide needs. So this will help feed that. And then as we take a look at that, by the time, you're looking at some of maybe these longer term improvements, we may have some more data in terms of those outlying areas, those lifeline services, that we can take a look at where our priorities are versus just what people are applying for. So that's coming, and we'll continue to work with Lucia and staff and all of you, so.
One of the players that's missing, it's too bad, is Lyon County, because I had heard when they were running for office, there was discussion of trying to get people in buses this way from Dayton area. So they're not here to represent themselves. But I got to tell you, that would be a wild ride to do it at VC in 6 Mile Canyon. People would pay money just for that ride down up that canyon and then down 6 Mile. And they'd need breaks about every other 2 weeks probably for the bus. So
Might be more than $1, right? I'm just saying.
might have been, yeah, for that ride, yeah, it would be an amusement ride instead of a bus ride, I guess. Isn't it on?
No, just another comment when you're done.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I would like to have had Lyon County come in on this, because I have never seen so many cars as I have in the last few years that use that road out, that section of Carson City. I mean, it's just a line of cars from 4 o'clock on. So there's probably a need out there, and they're part of CAMPO, and they're not here. So just a comment. Are you going to make public comment? If you are, I need to wait till we're done, and then I'll call you up. How's that? Is that okay? Thank you. Go ahead.
I think that what I wanted to do is, since they're not here, I'd like to leave the potential for the Topsy and the Lyon County still in the plan and really get their comment as to whether they think that's viable, because they may be the subsidy or match component. So I don't want to drop it out of the plan because they're not here to represent whether they think it should stay in or not. And so I just think we should leave it in, because again, it would be as funding is available, but maybe it moves to, again, it might not be right for the discussion in the short term, but I hate to leave it out. I liked his idea of that second tier, and maybe we leave the extended Campo area in that component. So I just wanted to put that on the record, not to leave it. Don't scrap it because they're not here.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that and include Story County, because if we're talking about Virginia City, it would be Story County as well. And more importantly, we need to find out from each one of those jurisdictions if they have any contributory funding to be able to do that.
Anything else? Okay, now we'll call public comment. If you'd like to come up and introduce yourself. I got a name tag, but I can't read it. Oh, great, thank you.
So I'm not here to make an official announcement, but I am taking notes to bring back, because transportation is a big need in our county as well. And we do have a lot of people that come from Lyon County to Carson and Reno for dialysis treatments. So that is a need that we have recognized. And again, we only have 1 day of service from the Dayton area to Carson. So I will be taking my notes back. But we wanted to make sure somebody was here today from Lyon.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, I'm sorry. You gave a name. Oh, your mic wasn't on. Can you identify yourself one more time so we can get it on the minutes for sure?
Maybe. Rebecca Williams, Lyon County Human Services.
There you go.
Thank
you. Anybody else from the public like to come forward? Seeing none, We'll bring it back for a no vote. It's just information, a whole lot of information. Thank you, Gordon. That's a good job. We're on 6B for possible action. Discussion and possible action regarding a cooperative agreement P 301-19-804 between CAMPO and the Nevada Department of Transportation for $684,211 for development of a transportation system management plan for Carson City, Douglas, Lyon, and Story counties, and authorizing the transportation manager to execute the agreement and future amendments regarding term extensions or a change in amount up to 10%.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you're aware, Carson City currently provides technical services for operations and maintenance of traffic control systems within Carson City, Lyon, Douglas, and Story counties. With decision-making supported by a technical advisory committee and representatives from each of the partner jurisdictions and the Nevada Department of Transportation, CAMPO staff have worked with NDOT to conceive this transportation system management plan. There's a need and a recognition of the need that having a regional approach to maintenance and operations of the traffic control systems, as well as a long-term vision for capital improvements and replacement fiscal planning, that there was a desire to create a framework to herd the cats, if you will. So what this agreement is it sets up the funding mechanism to support the formation of a technical advisory committee. If you look on packet page number 91, there is an exhibit. Packet page number 90 has the high-level scope of what this project is conceived to be. And on 91, it shows kind of graphically what this project is. So the agreement funds Carson City staff, management of this project, and execution of a contract with either a contractor or a set of contractors to do this transportation system management plan for the 4-county area that Carson City maintains the signals of. This would be done under the umbrella of CAMPO. It would encompass the CAMPO area as well as extend past CAMPO's boundaries. There's currently funding budgeted in the CAMPO Unified Planning Work Program. That funding is outlined for project initiation of these activities, and then the funding agreement that's come before you tonight would fund the project over most likely a duration of a couple of years. So phase 1 of the project has to do with performance measures and benchmarks. So this is, as a region, how do we know if we're doing a good job? How do we time our signals? Are we conservative with, we had a great discussion about signals at RTC month before, related to signal timing and how you prioritize pedestrians and how long those pedestrians cross and what is the regional approach and what do we want to do here when we're maintaining the signals. So phase 1 has to do with establishing those performance measures and those benchmarks. It also has to do with coordinated corridors. So if you're going through a corridor like US 395 down south from Kuntz south to Micah, how do you progress through those corridors, and how are the side streets prioritized or maybe deprioritized? Who has to wait longer? And when we retime, how do we know if we're doing a good job? So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is an asset management plan. So NDOT maintains signal agreements with counties, I assume all counties in the state. And my understanding is that those agreements are unique to each jurisdiction. It's very challenging for them to manage. They've been working for a long time to develop a master signals agreement to streamline the management of those. So Carson City and Douglas County, the ones I'm familiar with, for example, they have to do with operations and maintenance of the signals, right? So Carson City agrees to maintain the signals, over I-580, for example, on Fairview. And long-term, when one of those signal systems needs to be replaced, whether it's the bolts on the hanging sign or the actual mast arm or the structure, we have to plan ahead for replacement of those pieces. So this asset management plan piece of phase 2 helps the local jurisdictions know ahead of time when they're going to need to replace those pieces, and also helps the state plan for long-term replacement of those pieces. So there's multi-benefit for the partner jurisdictions in this plan. Phase 3 then, budget permitting, has to do with an implementation piece. So out of the benchmarks and then the asset management piece, right? So what needs to be replaced? Are there control things that need to be improved? Detection loops, timing of pedestrian components? Then we would implement it over a corridor or a series of corridors throughout the planning area. This budget amount that we put here in this agreement is a high-level dollar amount. It is very high. There was a number that was thrown in the sky based on, kind of a wish list thing. And, when we get in here and we scope it out, so we will put out an RFQ and determine what the true cost is. I fully expect the true cost will be lower than this dollar amount. But this agreement tonight just authorizes staff to initiate the process, to convene the technical advisory committee, to refine the scope such that we can put out an RFQ and understand the full cost. I will reiterate that the staff time for Carson City Campus staff is fully reimbursable under the agreement. So I'm happy to answer any questions and hope I got all the high points from some of the questions I received from you in advance of the meeting.
So I guess I just want to understand how it's going to work, because sometimes you just look down and read something and suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute, what does this mean? So it's page 5 or number 11 on should the agreement be terminated by the local agency, which would be CAMPO, for any reason prior to the completion. So my concern is completion is phase 1, 2, and 3. So if we get to phase 3 and determine that we can't complete or continue, we owe them back for phase 1 and 2, even though we completed those phases? Is that what your reading of number 11 is? I just thought shouldn't it be by phase? Or I'm just concerned that you might do an RFQ, you might do an activity and find out that we're not going to get to phase 3, or there's not enough money in it. Do I owe back phase 1 and 2? And then we also would owe whatever the department spent in the project, which would be more than we even received. And I'm sorry I didn't catch this earlier. Like I said, I just happened to be looking down and I went, wait a minute, 3 phases? This doesn't say it's phase by phase and that we could discontinue the use. So sorry. They're like, not sure. Okay. And again, I apologize for not seeing that earlier.
I will say that this agreement is what I understand to be the second of its kind with NDOT, in that it's a planning implementation type agreement. The first one was done down in Vegas, and so this is the second one of this type. So it's using the STBG funds for this. My understanding is that NDOT staff might be amenable to looking at that clause. And there's an NDOT representative here that might want to comment on the record, maybe at the
Just
table.
concerned, like, wait.
Well, you can,
Come on
come
up.
forward. I mean, it doesn't mean you're representing NDOT, you just give us some feedback on your thoughts. I mean,
So, Kevin
push
Berry.
button, identify yourself, thank you.
So you guys can hear me. Kevin Berry, NDOT. So it's my understanding that the interlocal that we've put together establishes the funding that you can then go out with an RFP with. So you're technically, we've granted you authority to use that money to then go out with an RFP. To answer your question, I don't think that you would put yourselves in that position. The only reason I'm saying that is because during the negotiation of that, once you do go through the RFP process and start the negotiation of that scope, I think you would protect yourselves in terms of right scoping the job so that you could get through all 3 of the phases and sort of right size it for the amount of money that's available. That addresses 11. And then the next question you had in terms of paying us back if you didn't complete the job, I believe because you went through the RFP process negotiated with a contractor or a consultant, you would establish how you were going to pay that work out. So that wouldn't be a part of NDOT and CAMPO, that would be CAMPO and the consultant. So that would be a contract that you would build and then negotiate with them. So I think you would protect yourselves from not getting what we expect out of it. Again, in that contract, we also state that we'll have oversight, or I don't know exactly the language, but we'll be involved with the RFP process. So during that scope negotiation, we can set up an approval process that we say that NDOT would be approving or agreeing upon that scope that was developed during the negotiation with the consultant. The other question I think you had was our costs. We're not putting any costs towards this job. So typically what we do would be that we would set up maybe a project internally and build towards that. We're not gonna we're not billing the 684, I can't remember the exact amount, Lucia, but we wouldn't be billing that amount for our staff time in terms of being involved with the study, helping with any scope negotiation, things like that. So we could I'd have to read it, but we could probably talk about maybe getting that out. So, you know how NDOT contracts are, it's pretty hard to get them to pull anything out. So I'd have to actually get that legal opinion from our AG's office.
Sure.
So, and it may be that Todd and I agree that number 4 indicates that you'll do the joint final review of the project. But again, number 11, the way I'm reading this, unless I just see this all wrong, and Todd maybe can help us, if something goes wrong, it looks to me like $684,211 potentially, well, probably not that much, because we'll have a failure before that, but $600,000 we might have to owe back, and we might be in a protracted discussion potentially with a vendor. So I guess if they accept the project under number 4 and say we are marching in the right direction and you're meeting the goals and the objectives of the contract, and as long as we adhere to that, I don't want to pay money back if it doesn't go. I'm just looking out to say, have we protected ourselves appropriately and yet met the needs of the contract, which I think number 4 accomplishes, that says, yes, DOT and CAMPO agree this is the right documents, and you can bless the vendor and be on the bid team or anything like that. But I'll just ask, sorry that I didn't get this to you earlier, Todd, to take a chance, but it just struck me that it says for any reason. So I'm like, well, any reason? Even an act of God? Oh, I mean, it says any reason.
Well,
Sorry. Is there another language that
Supervisor
gets us out of
Bagwell,
it?
your concern is a good concern. And for the record, this is Todd Reese, Deputy District Attorney. This is somewhat standard language from NDOT. My observation is that 11 is termination by us unilaterally. If we were to agree that with NDOT that this agreement should be terminated, that would fall under subsection number 10, and which doesn't have the payback requirements.
Right.
That said, you're correct that number 11 is vague as far as completion of the phases of the projects. It doesn't address that. So it's kind of open to interpretation, which is never good, as to whether one phase would be sufficiently contained such that we wouldn't have to pay it back. To some extent, we could, I forgot your name.
Kevin,
Kevin,
very,
as Kevin indicated, to some extent, we could protect ourselves with the subcontracts or RFP process and putting language in there protecting ourselves against this particular provision. That said, perhaps we could renegotiate or look at this particular provision with NDOT.
I'm only speaking for myself, but I just find it kind of an abhorrent, because it also has an or on their part, not just us. The first one is if we get out, then it says, or the agreement is terminated by the department that they didn't think we performed,
Right.
then we also have to pay back money. And while I agree that he doesn't plan on charging, I'm not so sure I wouldn't see them say, no, we put 15 hours into number 4, and that's at $150. I don't know. I prefer to have things buttoned down and that there isn't, I don't like problems that come up later because they like to do it. I mean,
Right.
they happen. So I'm just questioning.
Go ahead.
So, Lucia, is the agreement time critical? In other words, if we get this sorted out and come back next month, is that too late, or how does that work? We'd lose the funds?
I'll let Mr. Very confirm. My understanding is that it's NDOT's desire to execute this agreement before the end of the month to obligate the funds in this current fiscal year.
Can we approve with a clause that lets them negotiate that fix with the DA's office? You know what I'm saying? That we can say, we approve of the contract, but that we would like the DA's office to conform or work with DOT on number 11 or something? Can we do that in a motion?
I think that you can do that in a motion. My question then is, if we can't negotiate something different, then would we come back for you to reconsider it, or would it be do your best efforts to try and fix this and approve regardless? So then it would be up to you as far as what sort of authority you're giving me or giving staff on the negotiation of that provision.
Yeah, looking at number 11 and the second part of that, if the agreement is terminated by the department due to the local agency's failure to perform, led me to look for the dispute resolution language in the contract. I don't see any.
There isn't any.
So how do we determine whether one party or the other failed to perform or was in default if we don't have a dispute resolution clause in the agreement? Because I think that could solve a good portion of the problem if we had the dispute resolution language. But I don't think it solves all the problem, but I think it would solve some of it.
Your question about the dispute resolution is also well taken. Absent the language in the dispute for specific dispute resolution, it would be addressed by paragraph number 15 on the next page, which is going to court.
Wonderful.
That's not the preferable method.
Yeah. Well,
We were so busy on the big jack bus transit that I just didn't spot this till I was looking at it, so.
No, that's okay. So again, this agreement is an interlocal, like a planning agreement that authorizes us to start spending money to refine the scope. We wouldn't actually spend the money, if you will, until we work up an RFQ in partnership with NDOT and the partners in the Technical Advisory Committee to spend the funds, at which point that RFQ and that contract would come back to this board for approval. if the RFQ comes back and the bid on the RFQ and the negotiated cost of the contract comes back under this, we would necessarily have to amend this contract to be less than the 684 at that time, if you're following me. And at that time, again, the scope then has evolved such that our liability continues to decrease, our risk continues to decrease. I hear you, it doesn't negate your concerns at all, but
I guess I'm seeing that what's coming back to us, if it's within this, is only the contract with a vendor. We're not going to be seeing the DOT side again.
you wouldn't be seeing, you would potentially see the DOT side again if we didn't need all the money, right? So if
Well, you're not going to get more than 634, 84, whichever answer. You're not getting more. Let's say they came in higher, you're not going to go back to DOT to get more money. You would just downgrade the scope that they would agree to from paragraph number 4.
We would cut the
So I'm not seeing where this would come back to us. It wouldn't, right?
So I think that this language is something similar to this is in all the agreements that we have with NDOT. I think Lori's concern, and she can correct me if I'm not understanding her correctly, is because this project is done in phases. If we have successfully completed phase 1 and phase 2, and we've spent that money and NDOT has signed off on it, then why would we pay that money back if we get to phase 3 and can't complete the project? So this is the difference between the normal contracts, agreements that we have with NDOT and the language that we're seeing in this one is that we're doing everything right in phase 1, we complete that, everybody signs off on it, we get to phase 2, we do that, everybody signs off on it, we get to phase 3, and there's a 10.4 earthquake and we don't complete the project. And so I think that is the concern.
He's absolutely right. Who knows? We don't have the right staff. We can't complete something in the 6-month period of time that's left. We can't. Things happen. And I just don't want the taxpayers on the hook for something. And while I actually think DOT is a great partner and would probably amend and say, no, we consider that phase 1 again is done and you just won't do a draw for phase 3. But it's just not the way I'm reading the agreement, and I would prefer it to be a little more clear on the phasing. And especially it's a multi-year contract, and that's where I also get concerned is that it's not the same parties that were part in the beginning of it with an understanding versus here's who's here 3 years later, and we don't have the same understandings.
I hear your concerns and I tend to agree with them. So if it would be okay with the board and with the DA's office, I would suggest that potentially you make a motion as suggested, Supervisor Bagwell, to approve the agreement contingent on maybe myself and DA's office negotiating with NDOT staff and seeing if there's ability to phase in, get the phases in that language in 11. And if not, staff would bring this back in August for discussion.
And to see if there's any objection on the part of NDOT to add dispute resolution language. I don't understand why they wouldn't be agreeable to that as well, because I'm sure they don't want to go to court first as a first resort any more than we or anybody else would.
Did you have anything? No. A 10.4?
11.A.
I was on STAC for years, and I know why they put this in there, because their NDOTs have problems sometimes with some of the smaller counties that don't have the staff, and they put the money there, and it sits and sits and sits and sits. So it's a way that if it does get them into trouble, they're not wasting taxpayers' money. But this, Carson City has a good track record, so I would bet that there's going to be a willingness to resolve wordsmithing that sentence that makes more sense. Because we still have a responsibility to finish the project, so they're just, you got to have something in there to guarantee that we're not going to walk out 3/4 of the way through. So we'll figure out a motion then.
Mr. Chair, before we go to a motion, Supervisor Bronkowski, I just wanted some clarification on your point on the dispute resolution. Is that, I understand amending paragraph 11 to be somewhat mandatory, but I wasn't sure whether your comment on dispute resolution is we need to get that in, otherwise no-go and we bring it back, or whether
I'm
that's...
not saying that, but I think that there's fairly standard language out there for an arbitration clause that just allows the parties to go through a third party before we all resort to going to court. So if we can get that in there, I would like to see that, but it's certainly not a deal breaker because we've signed other agreements. Where it's not in there, I just don't understand why there would be an objection on NDOT's part to putting it in there.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
And I thank Lori because I'm the one who signs the contract here. I mean, the minutes of the official thing here, but we'd all go to court.
See, I'm trying to save you. I'm trying desperately to save you.
So I got a call for public comment just in case anybody had public comment on this. Not, thanks, Kevin, for voicing, and I know it's not easy to do sometimes, to come up. Yeah, thank you. Now I bring it back to the board for any more discussion or a motion. And Lori, have you maybe put some words together to
Let me give it a
help
shot.
that?
Yeah, shouldn't have a.
Unless there's any more discussion first, but seeing none, you're on it.
I move to approve the cooperative agreement with the authorization for the DA's office and Public Works, Transportation, to amend paragraph 11 to include project phasing for repayments and to try to negotiate a dispute resolution. If paragraph 11 cannot be amended, then bring it back to this board for further discussion. Dispute resolution's not mandatory.
Second from Supervisor Bonkowski. Any more discussion? Seeing none, call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimous. Thank you. 6C for possible action, possible discussion and possible action regarding submitting the CAMPO Disadvantaged Business Enterprise 3-year goal for federal fiscal years 2020 to 2022 to the United States Department of Transportation.
Mike Reynolds here.
Thanks, Mike.
So every 3 years, we are required to update our disadvantaged business enterprise goal for the federal grant monies we receive from the Department of Transportation. Goals for FHWA funds are handled by NDOT. However, we have to cover our FTA funds. So we determine that goal by assessing potential projects we may seek contracts for in the next 3 years, determining the amount of FTA funds we'd be spending on those, and then further refining it by the number of DBE certified companies in the market area that we could potentially contract for that. So 3-year goal has been updated for federal fiscal year 2020 through 2022 to 0.72%. Our previous 3-year goal was 0.13%. The difference is due to an increase in available DBE certified construction companies in our market region that could potentially work on sidewalks and ADA ramps and various similar projects. So the goal methodology document was published on the CAMPO website for 45 days from May 10th to June 24th, in keeping with the CAMPO public participation plan for 30 days and the FTA regulation for 45 days for public comment. No public comments were received during that time. Additionally, FTA requires a stakeholders meeting, which was held on May 22nd. We received some limited responses. However, some feedback from the stakeholders meeting indicated that companies in the area are just not aware of the DBE certification program. So staff may perform more outreach regarding that in the future. A very positive response to the workshop was received. That's on page 100 of your packet. One of the attendees was very delighted that we were doing that, and happy to make their day. So I hope that we can continue to reach out to the community and get more DBE certifications. However, staff are recommending approval of the DBE goal and authorization to submit to the FTA. However, before I open this up for questions, I would like to propose a change to the motion. Should read, I move to authorize CAMPO staff to submit the DBE goal as presented rather than the report as presented. Any questions?
Mike, is there a benefit to Carson City in submitting grant applications for increasing the DBA goal?
So the DBE goal has to be set as a requirement for receiving FTA funds. The national goal is 10%. However, we're allowed to change that based on availability of DBEs in the area. So that's what we're doing here, is showing we are receiving grant funds, and therefore we now have to tell them we're going to set a goal for spending them on DBE companies.
So the short answer is no.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody from the public want to come forward, speak to this? Seeing none, bring it back for a motion or any other discussion.
I move to authorize CAMPO staff to submit the DBE goal as presented.
Second, Chaz. Any other discussion? Seeing none, call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimous. Now we're on 6D. For possible action, presentation discussion regarding the submittal of a request to the Nevada Department of Transportation to classify Santa Barbara Drive between Stephanie Lane and Vicky Lane, and to classify Vicky Lane between Santa Barbara Drive and Stephanie Lane as minor collector roadways. Dirk, it's your turn.
Thank you, Chair. So Santa Barbara Drive and Vicky Lane are located within Campo area. They're located just north of Stephanie Lane, which is in the northern part of Douglas County. Both roads are currently a local road, and Douglas County is requesting the reclassification from a local to a collector roadway. From a regional transportation standpoint, Campo staff does not see any concerns with this reclassification. Douglas County staff, Josh Nordlow, who is in the audience, is with engineer with Douglas County Public Works. They have taken this request to the Douglas County RTC, who approved pursuit of this reclassification. Both Campo staff and Douglas County staff have spoken with NDOT. They are on board with this reclassification, and they are in support of it. The benefit to this reclassification is that it's going to allow Douglas County to use the Surface Transportation Block Grant funds or possibly other federal grants for these roads. That concludes my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I just had one. What is the policy that the road has to be in a certain condition before you can call it give it a new title? So if it's all in poor condition, can you change the rules so all of a sudden right off the bat you got a piece of roadway that's failed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't seen anything that talks about condition, but it wouldn't surprise me. One of the things that we look at is how is it functioning? And Santa Barbara Drive and both Vicky, they're really funneling local traffic. Both of them, Santa Barbara Drive, doesn't have any driveway access. Vicky Lane has minimal, but it's really funneling traffic from these local subdivisions onto the bigger network. So it's really kind of a how's it functioning? I can look into it and see if there's.
Well, no, it's okay. I was just curious if
good question.
Not to pick. See, John Erb's not here to defend himself, but I don't want to stick another person on the hot mic here. But I was just curious how that works, because I know Carson City go through a lot of work to get their streets into the system for Campo. So.
And as you know, we did that pavement survey with Douglas County. So I don't have it with me, but we do know the pavement condition for both those roads.
All right. Did you have anything you wanted to say since you sat through a 2-hour meeting here, or hour and a half? You can come to the mic. If not, it's up to you.
I just came to answer any questions. Josh Nordlow for.
Can you turn on the mic? I'm sorry, Josh.
Josh Nordlow, Douglas County Public Works, for the record. I just came to answer any questions. As Dirk spoke, South Santa Barbara It's a divided roadway. We have no residential driveways. It connects to Stephanie and Vicky on each end. We want to do Vicky as well down to Stephanie. It just, in our minds, it makes sense for the connectivity of the area.
All right, thank you. Any other?
Well, I was going to say, Mark,
great.
typically the change in the designation of a road from minor residential to a collector to an arterial has to do with your average daily trips. So when it gets to a certain ADT, then that's when it changes its where the classification can be changed. So that's probably the impetus for this reclassification.
Josh Norlow, Douglas County Public Works again. And speaking with NDOT, they were not looking at trips. They were just looking at how it functioned in our roadway system. We're also looking at trying to do another road that's not in Campo, and we talked trips on that, and he said, basically, they told us it's how it functions in your roadway system. NDOT basically told me that we know our roadway systems. He doesn't have time to drive all of our roads to decide what they are. So if we feel that's the proper judgment, then he would stand behind us.
Well, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I guess I call for the public. Nobody from the public come forward? We can bring it back here for a motion or any other discussion.
I move to approve submittal of the request as presented.
Second from Lori. Any more discussion? Probably not. Call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimous again. Move on to item 7 on the agenda, internal communications, administrative matters, future agenda items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our newest transportation team member, Dan Anderson, has been sitting in the audience patiently, but behind the scenes, he's been working really hard on our monitoring documents and our monitoring report. So we're hoping to bring a document to you next month, which is a long time coming, and I'm really excited to bring that to you. We're also continuing to move forward with the transit plan. I'm not sure, based on the agenda deadlines, if we'll make with the draft plan for August, but that's what we're shooting for. And then we also intend to bring an update to the public participation plan.
Okay, any board comments starting on the right, Jess? No. Nope, 4 nopes. Next meeting scheduled for 4:30 Wednesday, August 14th here. This is another chance for public comment. If anybody wanted to come forward. If Dan wanted to at least come up and say something, no? That's okay. So seeing none, I please call for somebody for adjournment, please.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Where's so RTC meets at 6:15. Thank you.
meeting of the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission. It is 6:15 PM, Wednesday, July 10th, 2019. We are in the Sierra Room at 851 East William Street. Mark, can you call roll, please?
Chair Bunkowski.
Here.
Vice Chair Kimbrough. Commissioner Bagwell. Commissioner McQuarrie. Commissioner Stedfield. Quorum's present.
Thank you. All right, agenda management notice. Any changes to the agenda tonight?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any disclosures from members of the commission? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item 4, public comment. Any member of the public that would like to come comment at this time? And we have no public here, so I will move on to item 5, approval of the minutes. Had the members of the commission read the minutes? And if so, I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes for June 12th.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Passes unanimously. We are now on agenda item 6A, public meeting items for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding allocating $280,725 from Carson City's apportionment of federal fiscal year 2019 surface transportation block grant funds to the multi-use path to Colorado project and to the airport road, sewer, and roadway reconstruction project. And Dirk, I believe this one's yours.
Thank you, Chair. So the allocation request is broken into 2 projects. The first project has to do with the multi-use path to Colorado Street. This is requesting $261,000 in addition. Back in 2016, a competitive grant was sought and awarded with the Nevada Department of Transportation. The project is currently at 90% design. Based on the current estimate, additional funds are needed. There's kind of 2 reasons, somewhat similar, on why we need additional funds. One, there's a concrete barrier that's required to go between the path and the freeway. That's a little bit more, quite a bit more costly than we thought. And then also just generally the cost since 2016. We try and estimate additional costs over the years, but we were just off this time. So the second project then is for Airport Road, Sewer, and Road Reconstruction Project, and this is requesting $19,000 in STBG funds, Surface Transportation Block Grant funds. This is a joint project between Sewer, Water, and Transportation. Previously, the RTC approved $160,000 to allow for reconstruction of airport in lieu of patching. The additional funds being requested is to correct a severe valley gutter between Menlo and Airport Road. Currently, we have current issues with maintenance on our buses that are hitting, and also over the years we've had experience with general traffic that aren't slowing down sufficiently enough and are scraping there at that location. So that really concludes my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions. There is additional information in the staff report regarding the balance of STBG funds for our federal fiscal year 19. Happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any idea of what the cost of the damage being created by the valley gutter is? Like it says we have ongoing repairs. I'm just wondering if we're going to save money by fixing it.
Realistically, we're not going to save money for a period of time. What's happening is, if you can envision the bus turning the corner from Airport northbound, turning left onto Menlo, it can't go straight onto Menlo. It has to turn that corner, and it's that bottom rear corner, the driver's side rear corner of the vehicles that are scraping, and there's a bracket on the underside of the bus that's being twisted and ripped off. We have some buses that have, it lifts the back of the bus. Yes, the air ride that lifts the back of the bus. And those vehicles, when we try to prioritize those for that route, but sometimes breakdowns, preventive maintenance, we have to use the other buses. And I don't believe the brackets are that expensive, but it does take staff time from the fleet division, and it has become kind of a nuisance.
Yeah, I've been through that intersection, so I know that valley gutter. Any questions from the commissioners? All right, looks like you're gonna get your money. I'll bring this, public comment, no public. All right, so I'll bring this back to the commission and entertain a motion.
I move to approve the allocation of surface transportation block grant funds as presented.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Passes unanimously. And we are now on to agenda item 7, starting with 7A, Transportation Manager's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to announce, I believe I blind copied you all on an invitation to the Traffic Committee, the Transportation Resource Advisory Forum for Carson City. The annual meeting of the Traffic Committee will take place July 23rd. It's a Tuesday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. here in this room. As we did last year at approximately the same date, staff will be presenting the draft list of projects being considered in Performance District 2 for the capital projects for transportation for fiscal year 2020. We will also be presenting a summary of fiscal year 19 and how those projects went in Performance District 1. I invite the public and anyone that would like to attend that meeting. Again, it's from 3 to 5 p.m. on the 23rd of July.
Lucia, since we haven't talked about traffic in a while, can you
Sure.
please on the record explain what traffic is and who the stakeholders are?
Thank you. Absolutely. So the Traffic Committee is interested, members of the public that care about transportation, that have an interest in advising staff on issues that they see, helping gain a broader understanding across the community of how we spend our transportation dollars on our roads, on potholes, cracks, reconstructing asphalt, anything like that. We use it as an opportunity to gain valuable feedback on, where staff should direct money. There is no statutory authority of the committee. They don't, necessarily direct staff, but staff do take those comments and those opinions very seriously, and they do inform project selection. We bring those things back to the RTC to approve those projects.
Right, and some of the stakeholders are the school district, the hospital,
Absolutely.
Chamber of Commerce.
The chamber, business owners, there's some nonprofits on there, folks that have worked in the industry and are retired. It's a really broad swath. In the beginning, when it was conceived, I think there was originally maybe an invitation list, but at this time, I would say the invitation is open. Any interested citizen that would like to come participate, please do come and participate and join the committee and help us make these decisions.
Yeah, originally we put together the original stakeholder list, and I believe there's 23 stakeholder seats in the original committee.
We've had a couple, since I've been here over 2 years, that have asked to be taken off the committee. They've moved or had other obligations. We've added a couple of representatives. There's a former Board of Supervisor that has recently joined, and so it's a really broad, diverse group, and really fun when we meet. I wish we could meet more. It's just, it is what it is at this point. My second update for the manager's report, I just wanted to announce that our new transit coordinator, Michael Reynolds, he helped apply for a $50,000 ADSD grant. This is the grant that we apply for annually that supports our free Transit for Seniors program. We were awarded this grant. It was a successful grant application. We do a free passes for seniors. We do a few days at the beginning of July. We did that last week. Our annual goal for free passes is 333. We do exceed that every year. You can pick up passes at any time at the Jack Admin Building and other areas around town, such as the library and the senior center. But we did exceed our annual goal in the first week, last week. And so, it's a very popular program, and it was really great that we won the grant again. So I just wanted to make that announcement. And that concludes my manager's report.
Any questions from the commissioners on the report? Seeing none, did you have questions, Craig? No? All right, then we will move on to 7B, Street Operations Activity Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 7B is on packet page number 13. Just 3 quick items I wanted to point out to you. This report, as you know, is delayed. This is for May of 2019. The big ticket items in May, per usual, there was really nothing out of the ordinary. I did want to highlight the weed abatement, 3,900 gallons. The sidewalk and flat work, this is that time of year. Our guys are out there, they're doing a great job. And then down at the bottom of that page, packet page number 13, the curb miles swept and the material picked up. The sweepers are out in full force, trying to keep those streets clear of debris. So happy to answer any questions you have on that.
Any questions from the commissioners? On the 7C?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Project status report. I'm going to go through this rather briefly. South Carson Street Complete Streets Project on packet page number 16. Just want to let you know that the right-of-way certification has been approved by FHWA. Dan Stuckey, the city engineer, and his team, Tom Grundy, the project manager. It seems like every time I open my email, there's a new document that they're putting out. They're really grinding it out there and doing a great job. Staff internally received the 90% designs for this yesterday, I believe. I have not even looked at them yet, but we are on schedule. We continue to be on schedule, and I believe that the next round of those public hearings for the design are on schedule for August. The freeway multi-use path to Colorado, this project was one of those where in order to get funding, we needed the plan submitted by July 15th to work on a notice to proceed from the state. These plans have been submitted on time, and we do expect the notice to proceed by end of August. Turning the page to Fairview Drive reconstruction, the 60% design plans have been submitted, and the 90% are scheduled to be submitted in advance of July 15th. So again, we are going to meet that deadline, and we expect to get the notice to proceed.
They've been submitted.
Already submitted. Thank you, Dirk. The Kings Canyon Trailhead Improvement and Roadway Reconstruction Project. Our staff have been working with Central Federal Lands on to work toward the 70% design plans. There have been a lot of discussions with property owners near that trailhead about future location of the restroom, about how we want that trailhead how the city wants that trailhead to function long term, location of monument signs and those sort of things. And staff have been working really close with that Central Federal Lands team, so that continues to progress as planned. The Stewart Street Pedestrian Signal Project. If you've driven out there, you've seen the roadway work is completed. That said, the electricity is not yet turned on. You should see, as I understand, the RRFBs have been bagged. There was some delay with the permitting with NV Energy to get the electric turned on, but that should be resolved in the next few weeks, hopefully. The CDBG College Parkway Improvement Projects, the pre-construction meeting is scheduled for next week. We're hoping to kick this project off quickly such that the second project related to this, which is further down in your packet, I'm not sure which page it's on. Give me a second. Down on packet page number 27, the District 1 Projects Part 2. That's going to follow on the tails of this ADA project. So we'll go in and do the concrete work first and then do the asphalt work after that. The Freeway Multi-Use Path to Edmonds Sports Complex project, the LPA agreement was approved by RTC in June. Staff are moving forward with design, which will start in the fall. Airport Road Sewer Replacement Project, we discussed this earlier this evening for the additional funds for Menlo. This is on schedule to submit the plans by July 15th in order to get the notice to proceed. So thank you for the action on that this evening. The District 1 Projects Part 1, this is all on schedule and anticipated to start this month. Similar, the Gonai Road Reconstruction Project is on the same schedule and everything is going as planned. The District 1 street lighting, we did get an updated cost from NV Energy for these two streetlights, which is substantially lower than the engineer's estimate. So that savings will carry forward into the District 2 pot, if you will, for projects this next year. I already discussed the Part 2 project on College, which we're hoping to squeeze in the end of this summer after we get that ADA work done. The Clearview Microservicing Project, Because this was funded with the V&T Infrastructure Fund, it was necessary to start work after July 1. That is on schedule. We're hoping to begin probably late July or early August. And then finally, the Root Street Rehabilitation Project. This is another V&T Infrastructure Fund project. Design will begin late summer or early fall. Staff have met and we've started conceptualizing the project and talking about right-of-way location and those types of things. So really looking forward to that. Happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Any questions from the commissioners? Go ahead.
Lucia, I would very much like to see the 70% plans for Kings Canyon when you get them, if that's okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'd like to see those too, if you don't mind.
Copy, we'll bring those to you, and just in case you don't know, the 30% design plans are online at the RTC website.
And then, do you know what the design you said for Root Street rehabilitation will be late summer, early fall? When is the anticipated construction? Is that next spring?
Excuse me. Realistically, we will put it out for bid next spring.
Okay. Any other questions on the projects? All right, seeing none, any board comments? Greg? Lori? Mark? Tez? Next meeting is tentatively scheduled after the CAMPO meeting on August 14th, 2019, right here in this room. Any final public comment? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you all for showing up and attending.